Take it away, Sue Ellen.
Okay, welcome everyone. It's great to see a nice group gathering, even though we can't be in person. And I'm Sue Ellen Hirschman Cherepin, for those of you who don't know, president of Watertown Citizens for Peace, Justice, and the Environment. And great to have some terrific guests and lots of all kinds of interesting stuff already happening in the chat. So I'd like to start off this meeting with our land acknowledgement, and which reads as follows. This land acknowledgement honors the indigenous peoples on whose traditional territories we are situated, the Pequasit Band of the Massachusetts tribe. Pigsgusset is an English rendering of the indigenous name for Watertown, which we understand to mean the meadows at the widening of the river. We acknowledge the continued presence and resilience and sovereignty of indigenous communities and nations today, and we thank the indigenous peoples for their goodwill in our efforts to collaborate in the challenge of decolonizing, recovering, and restoring indigenous histories, lives, and futures. So at this time, I chatted a couple people individually, asking them to please try to put their full names into their profile for the purpose of getting accurate minutes. So if you haven't done that, if you could go ahead and do that, that would be great. And next, we're going to have very, very brief, like 1 minute, if possible, reports from our working groups, just to give us quick updates on what they're up to, so we can have a maximum amount of time for this presentation. And we're very, very happy and delighted to have such a wonderful and interesting topic. So would someone like to just report from Watertown Community for Black Lives? Anyone want to give a quick update? See anyone at the moment?
Jackie, can you do it?
You have to unmute though.
Yeah, I know. Well, there's still, Diana might be more up to date than I am, but they're still doing their monthly vigils, and they've gone to meetings are every 3 quarterly. So we're having fewer meetings. So there's a lot of we've got the individual subgroups of the working group. So we have the race wheels, and we have one coming up in October soon. And I know they're working on trying to support the I'm sorry, I'm a little spacey here. They're supporting the Human Rights Commission ideas and things like that. So I don't know, Diana may want to add, because she's probably been to more meetings than I have.
Yeah, they're pretty active with the schools still, I think, and with the trying to get a new police chief, things like that. You know, I can't think of anything else right now, but the last vigil that I attended, I think it was last week, was a good one. And so that was nice to be at. Yeah. And a lot of people are very positive as they drive by these days, which is great. So that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Thanks to both of you. Pam, do you want to give us a quick update on Friends of Bees working group?
Oh, wait, what? Am I there?
You're there.
Yeah, you're there.
I was just looking up a couple of links. So our big event of the fall, the garden tour, which was our 25th tour, just happened last weekend, despite the rain, and we proved that gardeners were not scared off by rain. And we had a really lovely social hour. And I was just putting into the chat a link to the events page on Watertown Community Gardens website, where there are some more upcoming days that people can do maintenance of pollinator gardens. And also over this summer, there was a lot of activity towards removing the invasive plant black swallowwort, which is a vining plant. And I worked with Katie Swan I forget which office, Office of Sustainability, I think it's called, as part of the Mayor's Monarch Pledge to help people learn how to remove this particular invasive plant, which is a threat to monarch butterflies because it's just related enough that the adults will lay eggs on it, but it's not related enough for the caterpillars to survive. And I'm about to put a link to that into the chat as well. And that's it for now.
Okay, thanks. And I don't see anyone from Pisgusset working group at the moment. If I'm wrong, correct me. And I can just maybe give a brief.
I can,
Yeah, I mean, I know people are really, really engaged working on Indigenous Peoples' Day. That's
yes.
like a major effort going on and getting ready for Fair in the Square this weekend and getting people to volunteer and be at different tables that we have. Jackie, did you want to add anything else? Or is that...
Just that, you know, the Indigenous Peoples' Day is on October 1st, and it's really going to be great. It's going to be at the Hosmer School. We have a lot of people that are, a lot of performers, and it's going to be a great event. So people can come to that. That would be great.
And just so people know, even though officially October 9th is Indigenous Peoples' Day, and we're trying to avoid conflicting with other Indigenous People Days celebrations in the area, including Newton. So that's why we're doing ours on October 1st from 1:30 to 5. And I see Watertown faces climate change.
Right. We just meet and work. That's what we do. I'll just make it brief for you, Sue Ellen. I'll just say we meet a lot and we work a lot on climate things. Join us.
It sounds good.
I just want to add one thing, that we are co-sponsoring with Progressive Watertown a forum on polluters pay, and that's a state legislation that Steve Owens is sponsoring. And what it will do is it's sort of like the can't remember the act. Anyway, major polluters who have been contributing to greenhouse gases will have to pay for remediation measures, which we all know are going to amount to millions and trillions of dollars. So this is some state legislation that we want to make sure gets passed this year. And I hope everyone will come. I'm going to put sort of the date. It's October 22nd, a Sunday, to report at the library. And I'll put that in chat.
Okay, thanks. And I'll give a brief report for the Refugee Support Group. We're just completely overwhelmed at the moment with having been asked by the state to care for 16 Haitian refugee families in a small hotel in Watertown. And it's just been an enormous, enormous activity. And we've been all rallying, trying to provide food and medical, help and guidance, and getting kids registered for school and physicals and vaccinations. And you can just imagine, and whatever you've read about the chaos going on at the state level, we are in the thick of it. And it is really complicated effort that everyone's making to try to honor the Massachusetts law for right to shelter for families and the overwhelming numbers of refugees who are pouring into Massachusetts. So that's what we are doing. It's quite an extraordinary effort. And with no further ado, since the Peace and Common Security Working Group is responsible for this evening, unless you want to say something.
No, I think Susan's gonna do a brief 1 minute on the working group.
Okay.
Right. Well, we'd have a lot of events planned, excluding evening, and we will have a nice, strong presence at the square. So
I'm having difficulty hearing you.
Susan, I think we're not hearing you clearly.
Thank you, Tony. Can you hear me okay, Tony?
Yes, we got your
If you
stuff.
don't
in.
remember things, we have all of these things in it. So, yeah, I don't
Susan, you might need to
know,
just
maybe
turn off your video for now so we can hear you better.
my microphone isn't. What? Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, good.
Well, we were hearing you better. Now we don't hear you at all.
Okay, let me, Susan, I'm gonna just pick up on it, if that's okay. Because we can't hear you and now we can't see you, so I'm gonna pick up on it, so thank you. So we in addition to tonight's event, which we're very, and I'm gonna say a few words before I introduce Jim. We are gonna have a robust presence at the Fair on the Square. We have a special standout for ceasefire and negotiation on Ukraine on Sunday, October 1st from 12 to 1. We have a special program on Tuesday, October 3rd with Joe Gerson, our local a resident and an internationally recognized author and peace activist who'll be speaking on Ukraine. On the 15th of October, we have the presentation on IHRI, an anti-free speech definition of anti-Semitism, and that'll be at the library from 2:30 to 4:30. And then we're coming back on November 15th with a program called Can Nuclear War Be Prevented? With our friends at the Physicians for Social Responsibility. And the keynote person there is Denise Duffield, who is the Associate Director of PSR in LA. So those are our events. They'll be all publicized at the Fair on the Square. So let me just take it from there and say how pleased we are to have with us tonight Jim Ryan. I'm not going to do the introduction just yet because we promised each of our sponsoring groups, our co-sponsoring groups, to say a few words. But let me just say that this is an effort. This event was a particularly effort for the Peace and Common Security Working Group to team up with our Watertown Faces Climate Change Working Group and address the issue of climate crisis and militarism. So the two working groups got together to pull this off. And then we sought and got the very endorsement and participation of 350 Mass and the Peace and Climate Working Group of the our statewide peace group, Massachusetts Peace Action, and also the support of the Smedley Butler Brigade, Chapter 9 of the Veterans for Peace. So we tried to pull together some folks to do this event, and we're very pleased to have such fine sponsors, co-sponsorship. The two working groups are really pleased to have such fine co-sponsorships, and I promised that they will do a 1 minute and no more. So I'm going to see if Doug Stewart from the Smedley Butler Brigade wants to say something about how the brigade is doing. Doug, are you still with us? I don't know. I don't. Doug? All right, let's move on to Kathy, who's going to say a few words about the Peace and Climate Working Group of MAPA.
Okay, I'm actually co-chair with Rosalie Anders and John McDonough of the Twin Existential Threat Committee. And our campaign is called Peace Action Nuclear Disarmament United, or CAN DO. And our activities have included this past summer being co-sponsors with Veterans for Peace of the visit of the
Still haven't started.
Boat Golden Rule to Boston. We're very involved in supporting both nuclear disarmament and climate legislation at both state and federal level. And we're going to be co-sponsoring in October a webinar on psychic numbing and other psychological barriers dealing effectively with the threat of nuclear war and the threat of nuclear catastrophes. And we welcome any of you who would like to work with us on any of these projects, looking at both nuclear disarmament and climate catastrophe.
Thank you, Kathy. I tell you, there's a few really strong working groups over at MAPPA, and Peace and Climate is one of them. Anne, you want to say a few words about the Mass, the statewide group, 350 Mass?
Sure. We're really happy to be co-sponsoring this. My understanding is that when the United States has a number of what their greenhouse gas output is, it doesn't even include the military. They exclude that from the number. So the fact that we're talking about this tonight seems, and it's starting to, as I said, it was more present at the March than I expected. So that's great. And, you know, we're pleased to do that. We have a pretty nice new website. So if you're interested in the group, you can go to 350massachusetts.org and learn all about our local work and our state level legislative and campaign work. Right now, have two campaigns. One is the Make Polluters Pay that Deb talked about, and the other one is a emissions-free building campaign. That's where we are. I'm so happy to be here.
Thank you, Anne. So I'm going to move very quickly to introduce to you tonight. I do want to take this opportunity, about 42 years ago, I worked with an organization called Mobilization for Survival. And we had, we were working on 2 issues, we were working on 4 issues, but we had this idea of 2 sides of the same coin. And the sides of that coin were nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And now, many, many years later, we have this 2-sided existential threat to humanity. And the 2 sides of the existential threat are nuclear weapons and climate crisis. Now, granted, Jim is going to talk broader than about just nuclear weapons, but it is interesting to see that our intersectionality now, we were trying to do that many, many years ago. And it's great that we continue to do it. And I wanted to point out a really good example of intersectionality is when the environmentalists stepped up and supported the United Auto Workers on their strike, saying to them that workers who work on the e-vehicles should be paid as the same workers who work on the non-e-vehicles. That is an example of movements intersecting. And I just wanted to share that and share a little bit about the past intersection, and we continue to do that now. So without further ado, Dr. James Ryan, who served in the United States Marines, served in the United States Army in West Germany from 1969 to 1973. He earned his PhD at the University of Miami's School of Marine and Atmospheric Sciences. For over 3 decades, Jim has researched and published on topics in marine environmental geology and potential interactions of the U.S. petroleum industry to climate change. In 2009, he helped form the Veterans for Peace Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, the project that we're sponsoring this, we're reaching out to about this program. During the 117th Congress, CCMP helped draft with Representative Barbara Lee, House Resolution 767, which calls on the Department of Defense to report and to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. As Ann mentioned, those figures are not included when we talk about emissions. More recently, Jim has participated in protests in Washington, New York, and Lansing, Michigan. He is also an adjunct professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Geology at Wayne State University in Detroit. He is fresh from the climate and energy, the climate march on Sunday, and so I'm going to turn the program over to Jim.
Yeah, well, I thank you for this opportunity, and fresh might not be the operative phrase since I just got off of the bus. So, but let me set up here and start the slideshow. Okay. I'm not going to be saying very much about nuclear weapons. So I'm going to be mostly addressing the climate and militarism. I know that if we do have a nuclear, all-out nuclear war with Russia, it will create a nuclear winter that essentially would devastate the Northern Hemisphere. But let me just go ahead and concentrate on this militarism and climate crisis. And if I'm a little bit, I don't know, spacey tonight, like I said, I just got off the bus a few hours ago. Okay, the talk outline. I'm going to state the problem, which you're familiar with: climate crisis, U.S. militarism, progress versus reality, and what we can do. Okay, who am I? I'm a retired research geologist. So that's probably one of the reasons why I'm doing this. I mean, I did spend some time supporting the petroleum industry. The only oil I've ever discovered has been after I've been to one of these Jiffy Lube places, and I discovered oil leaking from my truck underneath the next day. That's the only oil I've ever discovered. I've looked at rocks. So a picture on the lower left is me with a support crew and two other geologists, and the rest were armed guards to keep away the bandits and stuff. I joined Veterans for Peace in 2004. Like, I think Veterans for Peace doubled or tripled in size with the Iraq War. That's Cindy Sheehan in the middle on the march from Mobile to New Orleans. And just started to get into getting too arrested. My third arrest was the other day in New York with about 100 other people. And I'll go into that a little bit towards the end. Now, you're all familiar with the immediacy of the problem. The picture on the left, you know, I mean, the smoke, it's pretty bad. It was bad here in Michigan, you know, from the fires in Canada, both in the maritime or the eastern part and in the west. So, I mean, this, you know all about this. Me as a research geologist, you know, I see the smoke. Yeah, that's really it gets to me. And what really got to me is this devastation in Libya. But you know, looking at, I think this was from Inside Climate News, and they're showing like the upper left is global sea temperatures. The earlier this year is in red. I mean, it's way out of the norm. Antarctic sea ice anomalies, again, way out of the norm. June global surface temperatures, out of the norm. Canada wildfire emissions, again, out of the norm. I mean, I like to watch a few movies. Is this our we can see the asteroid now moment when you look up in the sky? I was talking to a friend of mine, Elliot Adams, saying that I was really sort of funked out from this thing that happened in Libya, because I always used to say that I wanted to stay alive long enough to, you know, say I told you so. But things like what happened in Libya, it's not really very satisfying at all to learn that, you know, thousands of people are wiped out in an instant by something that's directly related to climate change. And you probably know these things. Our part, all the, Republicans or doubters or people that don't want to do anything say, well, China's the biggest emitter. That's on the left here, the annual CO2 emissions. And this is projected going out into 2050. Annual emissions per capita, this is from a Washington Post article. However, it's much larger in the United States, and it's projected to stay very much larger even out into 2050. And I want to mention here this is the per capita US, but the military per capita is almost double of what this is showing. Well, it's about 25 tons per person versus what we're seeing now in the US, which is about 13 or 14 tons per person. So it's pretty bad. This is the military per capita. Cumulative emissions, this is a critical thing. We're ahead of Europe, we're ahead of China. It's 2050. Maybe that's the date when people wanted to, we got to be zero emissions because China's going to catch up with us by 2050. Okay, so why is the military a problem? Well, the first thing, the direct emissions, and this is from a Inside Climate News article in June of last year. So the chart here shows emissions for 2022. Let's see, is it 2022 or is it 2021? Nope, it's 2019, excuse me. So China is the most, the US is second. But down here, if you consider, and this is the top 60 countries, the US Department of Defense would be ranked 54th as a country. So there's still 100 countries that produce less CO2 than individually than the military does. But that is scope 1. Now, if you're not familiar with scope 1, 2, and 3, scope 1 is direct emissions, flying the planes and running around with the tanks and things like that. Scope 2 is purchased energy, from the grid or whatever for the bases. Scope 3 is like building the tanks, building and construction, waste management, all these things. Scope 3 plus, and this is from a group called the Conflict and Environmental Observatory, otherwise known as CEOPS. And you can get this information from the militarymissions.org. They've come up with a way of documenting what the emissions are, and they're trying to sell this to NATO because NATO has not come up. Well, if they've come up with their own plan, they haven't publicized it yet. So CEOPS is trying to promote this. Give you some examples of the 3 plus would be like bunker fuels, waste, landscape fires, when you set the forest on fire when you're shelling it, or infrastructure damage, debris, reconstruction costs, things like that. Now, when you add those, and it depends upon who you're talking to. Anita Crawford from Brown University and now at Oxford. She says it's at least, well, looking at during the war on terror, the scope 3 was twice the amount of the direct emissions for the big suppliers. So we'll go with 2 times more. So then if you add the scope 1 emissions, then it's 3 times. So instead of being the 54th country, it's 20th to the 30th country. So like comparable to Poland, the Netherlands, which is the home of the Royal Dutch Shell, or at least it used to be the home. So these are significant emissions that you can't forget. So that's sort of the direct input of US emissions, just US. And you've seen these diagrams before from the National Priorities Project. Why is it the largest? Well, just look at an example of a B-52 1 hour is equal on average 7 autos, an average emissions for a year, 7 autos. And okay, that's just one plane, but the United States has the largest aircraft fleet, military aircraft fleet in the world, over 13,000 planes, or 3 times that of Russia, 4 times that of China. Then when you add all those up, and the Air Force is the biggest emitter of CO2 of all the branches, the Army and the Navy. And of course, then there's the 750 to 800 various size bases scattered all around the world, versus China has 4. They're building more. Russia officially has like 21. But, and then we get paranoid because China wants to build some islands and stuff like that, which is very hypocritical based on the opinions of a lot of people. And these emissions from these bases overseas are counted by the host country. So these aren't counted by us. We were informed of that by the John Kennedy staff last couple of years ago, right after the inauguration. So, but all this, is requiring emissions and money, of course. And speaking of money, why is the military so big? Well, we spend so much money. These are figures from 2021, 800 million, almost 3 times more than China. India is the next one here, Russia, so about 12 to 14. We essentially spend more money than the next 10 countries combined. And these large spenders, for the most part, are also large emitters. So China's number 1 emitter, US is 2, India is 3, Russia is 4. The EU countries, apparently they have their act together. As you noticed before, those per capita and the European emissions were lower than ours. So they are not in the top 5 of emitters. Who benefits? Again, you probably know this. People will say, well, we got to support the troops. Well, the average soldier and a sailor, and that goes up from, the PFC to the admiral, or the PFC to the general, and the sailor to the admiral, averages about 61,000. These are 2021 figures. Then there's the defense industry. The average worker, maybe about 90,000. This is again as of 2021. And of course, the CEOs of the big 5, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, and so forth, they bring in about 22 million a year. A lot of this is stock, but still, it's a significant amount of cash. And I think the last estimate I looked was these military companies spend on an average of $100 million a year on lobbying. So, Congress appropriates the money. Half of it goes to contractors, and the contractors give the money in the form of donations back to the lawmakers. Sort of creates a vicious cycle. Now, I mentioned I like movies. I mentioned the Don't Look Up movie. I'll go into the good, the bad, and the ugly. Now there's the good. Of course, article on the left here, Biden signed sweeping climate, health, and care tax bill into law, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Yes, it is the biggest bill that the United States has passed to date. But for, it's $369 billion for 10 years. So even though I'm a geologist, if I divide that by 10, I can figure that out. It's about 37 billion per year, or about 1/23 or about 5%, less than 5% of the National Defense Authorization Act for FY23, which is about the same time period. So we're essentially spending 5% on climate than we are spending on the military. And as a geologist, I'm more worried about climate change than I'm worried about Vladimir Putin or China. Another good thing. So it was mentioned, that we were working with Representative Barbara Lee from California, to get this resolution in here, to have the Department of Defense submit, their emissions. They had to submit them to Congress, and also to come up with a plan. So in the NDAA for FY 2021, the National Defense Authorization Act, the one that hasn't been funded yet, miracles. Republicans are saying yes or no, and so are the Democrats. Who knew? But at any rate, that was, the reporting was in the 21 NDAA, and the plans were in the 2022 NDAA. So this is good news, right? Of course, you can't find that report anywhere. It was put into you can find it in a climate, Inside Climate News, a link to it. But I gave it to the reporter, and she posted it on one of these websites where they had set up during the Trump era to house documents. So you can get to it there, but they're not required to report any longer. So that was a one shot deal, but it is by law they had to make that report. Now they have the plans, which I'll go over in the 2022 NDA.
I'm sure you have too. It's a pain in the butt.
I think somebody might need to mute.
I did it.
Okay. So the U.S. Army plan came out in February of last year. And essentially, I won't go into the details, but they said they were going to be net zero greenhouse gases, fully electric tactical vehicles, and attain net zero greenhouse gases for all Army procurements by 2050. The U.S. Navy plan said 65 reduction in scope 1 and scope 2 greenhouse gases by 2030, and net zero again by 2050. Now the DAF plan, where does DAF come from? That's the Department of Air Force. So that includes the Space Corps. So instead of just having the U.S. Air Force, it also considers the Space Corps. Now, they say net zero is really a great idea, but they didn't make any promises. They support it, and they suggest more training and research. So one might say, well, that's not very nice or very productive, but it might be the most realistic, because in the other two reports, they all refer to, we're doing this because of executive orders from Biden. As we all know, executive orders can change with the executive. But in that executive order, net zero to the maximum extent practicable and without compromising national security. Now that's a caveat or a hole in this whole promise, big enough to drive an Abrams battle tank through. So they don't really have to. They came up with their plans, but it could be all BS. Okay, some of the good is gone. Backsliding on emissions. Now the FY 2023 NDAA It renewed annual environmental and energy reports, but it didn't renew the emission reports. There is a pilot. The only tactical work that is, they put money into it is to work for biofuels for aviation, and not a lot of money. There's a pilot program for development of electric vehicle charging stations, things for limitations on the replace. There is also a limitation on the replacement of vehicle fleet and Department of Defense. So essentially they're saying you can't go out there, and buy a whole bunch of electric vehicles. You got to come to us, to Congress, to give you the okay. And they're studying federal fleet vehicles, so non-tactical, and they have to report within 2 years. Now, the FY 2024 isn't out yet, but it is worse, as you would think, because Republicans are in charge. And continuing bad, a recent article in Defense One, the Air Force is expanding their number of bases, especially in the Pacific. And an article that came out in the New York Times a few weeks ago, the Navy, Congress, in their wisdom, is forcing the Navy to build ships that it really doesn't want and doesn't know how it's going to use. And all these ships are just a big target. I don't know, but if a shipbuilding outfit is in your congressional district, you're going to make sure that they build ships. So more money wasted, ships go out and create more CO2. Now, the really bad is, Biden back in Glasgow promised $11 billion for the UN Climate Fund to help developing nations. Of course, there's nothing in the IRA, but then that wouldn't really be fitting. There was a bill that the Democrats came out with, but that was really cut up by Cotton and our friend Joe Manchin. Removed $8 billion from there. And finally, when the final omnibus bill came out in 2023, there was only $1 billion versus $857 billion for the National Defense Authorization Act for 2023. Now, this is a diagram from the IPCC report. And what we have here, the blue is where we need to be, limit warming to get to 1.5 degrees. Then the sort of the grayish green is to 2 degrees. The reddish is where we're going based on present trends. And right here, the nationally declared contributions. Now, some of these called NDCs are either conditional or non-conditional. And so the NDCs is what we promised in the Paris and what they're going to be promising more in the upcoming COP, to lower their emissions. And that's the difference here between here and the 2 degrees, okay, right there. Now, let me go, what is an NDC? I said there was a nationally determined contribution, there's conditional. So you can look up the NDCs for all the countries. You can just go to the registry down here. And I can send you a copy of this, and you can disseminate, the references to this talk. But, let's just look at one example to just show you this. So Angola. So the unconditional, the ones that they have promised to do without getting money to help them, they promised to lower it about 15,000 kilotons or 16,000 kilotons. But their conditional that with money is 26,000 kilotons. So not quite twice, but almost. Okay. Oops. So if you go back, and let me go back here. Whoops. So right here, probably half of this, we're not giving money to these people to lower these emissions. This is what I'm more afraid of than, China, and we don't give them money. There's no reason for them to lower their emissions, and then our ancestors are all screwed, or my grandchildren are screwed, because we could have given them money to help them out, but we didn't. Now this is the real ugly here. And No Warming, No War, I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, the National Priorities Project, the book by Todd Miller, Storming the Wall, goes into a lot of that, about how the military has been preparing for climate change for a long time, getting ready to keep the people of color out from coming into the United States. And this is a diagram or a cartoon from the National Priority Project, which I think really shows what the Army is aiming to do. Before Biden was in office, the United States spent about 10 times more on the border protection than on climate. Of course, there was hardly anything being spent on climate. Now it's about equal. Okay, well, now it's about equal. We spend still the same amount of money on border, maybe a little bit less now. I haven't come up with those recent figures, than we do on climate change. So, of course, the present holdup with the bill is that Republican caucus wants us to spend more money on border whatever BS than on climate change. Now, one thing that really funked me out before this last thing with Libya was this Code Red report came out from the IPCC the same week that Ukraine and Russia got into their conflict. And I would say it's also a
Ukraine
conflict.
and Russia didn't get into a conflict.
Well, I mean, Russia invaded Ukraine, but NATO is involved in this. But this is all Russia invaded Ukraine. Okay, but as far as there has been some discussions, which I won't really go into, about all the excess emissions coming from out of the Ukraine regarding this war. But I had a discussion. I was very lucky to be invited to a retreat, a Brown University sponsored retreat, or a Cost of War Project retreat, and Leonard DeKirk, who has done the work on the emissions, we had a discussion. And actually this war, along with the IRA, but I think mostly now the war, has depressed the global GDP to a point where global emissions are actually going down because global economies are going down. And that dwarfs the added emissions from Ukraine. I think the biggest problem is that emissions internationally are going up because, as Nita Crawford in her book, The Pentagon, Climate Change and War, shows, as you spend more money on the military, and I've demonstrated this in the, what the emissions are for the US military, all emissions for the international or the nation goes up. And, the EU, not the EU, but NATO has promised to increase their military expenditures. Of course, the emissions will then go up. So emissions are spiking. And I want to mention that, the developed countries could not come up with $100 billion that they promised for developing countries, but they had no problem coming up with the $2.2 trillion to spend on their military. Okay, what can we do? We have a website, and you can get to it by going I put it in the chat. And we have various, you can hit the little buttons there, and you can schedule a presentation. You can, urge major cuts to the Pentagon budget. Talk a little bit more about that. Promote this presentation to other groups, and don't let any particular political party off the hook. Now, one of the, and I might have to disagree with Ann. It certainly was better this time around than I've seen. And you all probably been to. You might have made the protest. What was it, 2014? Of course, it was a lot bigger, and there was some military. I know New York chapter of Veterans for Peace was there, but it was much larger. And the objective of our particular group, and like Code Pink and the anti-militarism hub of this End Fossil Fuels, was to get the word out to other environmental groups. Now, back in 2016, I was on the Hill with Citizens Climate Lobby the same time that this picture was taken of the Sunrise Movement on the Hill when they occupied Nancy Pelosi's office. There was hardly any mention of climate change then with the environmental groups. Now, in a demonstration we were involved in last year, there were a lot of young people. We're very happy for us to join with them. And you can maybe see some of the signs here that they were including militarism, not just our Veterans for Peace sign, but they were very happy to join with us. So it is starting to grow. I think Extinction Rebellion particularly. But so getting ready to go to this retreat, I wanted to get the book, the climate book by Greta Thunberg. I got it. I highly recommend this book. But none of the book's 100 essays. Now, this book has about 100 authors, including, Greta's 101, and she writes prologues and things like that to it for each subtopic and subtopic. But not one of the articles addresses directly the role of militarism. The essay, I think it's called The Perception Gap by Amitav Ghosh. He does talk about it, and that's where the figure that I got of the, you can really see where nations are going, international, not just the United States, that they can't furnish money for the development fund or for the green fund, but they can come up with $2.2 trillion for military expenditures. But he also points out there that militarism and imperialism is an underlying cause to why we can't address climate change. We haven't been able to over the decades. And so that's just something to point out. I pointed out the lack of coverage to Nita Crawford, and hopefully, since we're on the same side of the pond, maybe they can get together. At least Greta Thunberg can read the book, another book that I highly recommend, The Pentagon, Climate Change and War. Okay, what other things can you do? You can print down things from our website and publish them. We have stickers put on people's cars. It shows square here, but we were passing these out at the march. They're little round softball size stickers with the QR code on them that takes it to our website. Those are real popular, and people usually accept those, and hopefully they visit our website with before they throw the sticker in the trash. The Peace and Planet News that just came out, Tarak Koff and his wife Ellen Davidson put this out, and there's an article in there where I explain the ways that U.S. militarism fuels the climate crisis. I'm one of many articles. Highly recommend it. You can go to just Google Peace and Planet News. You can order some copies. Very, a lot of good information in there. And protests. Okay. We have one thing is we call it No Moss. Gary Butterfield in San Diego has been sort of leading this charge over a number of years. They've been protesting the Miramar Air Show, which is the sort of the center of Top Gun stuff. And they've been protesting the air show there for years. Protest in the lower left was in Washington, D.C. You really got to know where to get arrested. And this place here was a place you can get arrested. The other stuff that I've done, you could, I don't know what, not sure, you got to do something really nasty to get arrested in Washington there. The two pictures on the upper right corner, this was the where the stop U.S. militarism fuels the climate crisis. That was from the march on the 17th. And this picture on the lower right is from the Daily News, where 100 folks got arrested. And that was long as I've spent in handcuffs, that was not very comfortable, but it was a very good spirit. I'm hoping that maybe Uncle Joe, our president, might be getting the message. I know he can't do anything now. If he gets reelected and we can get a Congress, maybe he'll step up his game because we really need to. And I will, let's see, something happened here. I think, yes, another thing I've done. So I mentioned this book. So this is my my representative, and I went on and bought a bunch of copies. That's why I got invited to this retreat. I bought a bunch of Nita Crawford's book. Again, I highly recommend this book. It's filled with lots of information. And I bird dogged my representative at a Democratic convention we have in Michigan, numerous ones. And I said, Representative Tandahar, I'm giving you this book. And I had my picture taken just so if you lost it, I could tell him that I had it. I gave it to him. And when we had a lobby meeting and we discussed the book very quickly, he then, one of the asks was to endorse or become a co-sponsor on Barbara Lee and Mark Pocan's People Over Pentagon, which she's been reintroducing for a couple of sessions. And it was calling for $100 billion drop in the Pentagon budget. And immediately after this, he signed up. He signed up as a co-sponsor. Of course, it didn't go anywhere, but at least it did get debated as an amendment to this year's NDAA. And let's see, okay. That's it. So I'm open for questions.
Thank you, Jim. That was very, very enlightening. I'm going to ask people if they would just use the reaction button in the bottom of your screen to raise your hand. And I see we have one person already. Jeffrey Barkdole has a question. Jeffrey, go right ahead.
I know I wasn't watching much. I was in the living room trying to get over a hot flash. But I want to say, do you think all this information could be useful for the video game idea I'm working on? And to help promote that would help promote this kind of stuff.
I would hope so. Are you familiar? We had a group at Veterans for Peace called Gamers for Peace. Are you a veteran or?
No.
Okay, well, you don't have to be a veteran to be in Veterans for Peace. But if you're interested in working, well, they usually have worked. They had a team that would go to. There were already online games, and I'm not a gamer myself. but a lot of folks, I remember, young people coming up cold to, like, when I'm tabling, going, wow, man, you have really a great gaming setup. Or so, I mean, if you'll email me, and I put my email in the chat, and I can do it again if you didn't see it, and maybe I can connect you with some folks at Veterans for Peace. But yes, I think you could.
So what's their website link? What gamersforpeace. What?
Well, it was, if you go to Veterans for Peace, I think there's still a link for Gamers for Peace.
Oh,
Any other questions?
make sure you test yourself for COVID. Make sure. Again, after being out,
So you're feeling the effects of it, then, I'm assuming.
I already had it since Sunday.
Ah,
I
well,
got tested positive Sunday. Got the symptoms Saturday.
you must have had it before the March then. But
There is a question in the chat from Nao Sakurai. It says, what about the emissions in the US military bases on other countries? Is that included in the US Department of Defense emission?
well, again, according to the staff, we had if you recall, it was right either before or after the president had this meeting of climate leaders after he took office. And I can't remember if it was, it was before, it was after that, and before COP 26, the one that was in Glasgow. We had a meeting with Kerry's staff. And I mean, the United States, back in the Kyoto Protocol, and you probably know this, we pushed to make sure that military missions would not be included. And that applied not just to us, but to all countries. So that was changed and Kerry, and I think, well, I don't know Biden for sure, but maybe Biden, I don't remember. We're very happy when our representative came back, and he got that. Then, of course, George W. withdrew the United States from the protocol, but still excluding all military missions from all countries was still there. As far as I know, in Glasgow, the stipulation that you can't report it was removed, but it was only voluntary. What we're trying to do, and we're working with CEOPS on this, mostly they are working on it, is trying to get a country to introduce saying military missions should be part of what countries report. And that's the way it's done. Now, one of the fellows that was at the retreat, and I'm going to butcher his name, Axel Mykola. He is a German origin, but now living in Zurich, and he's been on numerous COPs, and he's going to try and perhaps do a study about missions. Right now, his main interest is emissions from occupied countries, and we got into a conversation about all the countries we're occupying with our bases, but it's a project that's in progress to get military missions from overseas. But to the answer to your question, right now, they are not included in our emissions. They're included in the host country's emissions.
Okay. We have two people with hands up, Alan and Susan. Alan, please go ahead with your question.
Okay, I'm going to try not to blurt this out, but there's so much propaganda in the U.S. media about the Ukraine war, and so that, like, protesting it is so difficult. and protesting change is also difficult. And like the people in Atlanta against Cop City, you know, have been charged with terrorism. So I guess my question is, how does one get the courage, or where do we find the courage to end up protesting both? Because from both, we're going to get a lot of crap, you know, directed back at us for protesting one, much less two. And it seems so difficult.
So Jim, I think you're asking you, where do you get your ability to continue to protest, whether it's on militarism or on climate?
Well, well, okay, I'm a research geologist. I really got into the climate thing in earnest when I just got ticked off that a lot of my fellow geologists in Houston were going, "Oh, it's not real." I'm going, "Where'd you go to school?" It's like, did you forget everything you learned? How can you put all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and not expect the climate to change? I mean, where are you? Well, this has happened before. Yeah, but it happened for a reason. And that's why it's happening now. And the reason is we're putting all this carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Can't you see this? But it's hard, you know, for somebody that gets their payroll, and I wasn't making that much money, so maybe, but I just got ticked off. But then I wrote papers, you know, trying, like what was mentioned in my bio. I've given the only two, I had a climate scientist with the first talk at the Houston Geological Society. But the way I can relate to, you know, Don't Look Up is, you know, I've been doing this for years, and you know, everybody's just like blowing it off. So, well, why don't I try, you know, and after 9/11, or not after January 6th, you know, I was working with Citizens Climate Lobby, and that was just, they just played, I could not see myself going to talk to a bunch of rebels and insurrectionists in the Republican Party. So I was very happy to find out that Veterans for Peace was sort of ginning up. We were just in the process of ginning up this climate crisis, the militarism project. So, and then Jim Driscoll said, well, so there's this group called the Climate Emergency Fund. And apparently they fund a lot of these people that throw paint and mashed potatoes and things like that. And they gave Veterans for Peace a little bit of money, and that sort of gave the boost to, they wanted to have some veterans get arrested. But it didn't, I mean, I didn't get any money. The money wasn't to pay people, it was to do, you probably know all the support staff that you have to have and transportation and things like that. They wouldn't pay bail, they wouldn't, so it went to buy posters and flyers and things like that.
And you know, the resistance that comes up in you perhaps to carry on this fight. Where do you find the resources and hope to keep doing it?
Hope. Well, again, I think it's more, I'm just pissed off. But you know, I have a grandson, you know, and I've got there's a crossing for an elementary school right outside my front door. I've looked at climate change in the rock record, you know, during my career. I know how nasty it can get. And, you know, I don't want that to happen to anybody. I mean, it's going to be a very terrible period that the human race is going to, the planet's going to be just fine. The planet would be very happy to get rid of our species. But our species is going to go through some very dark times. Just, you know, look what happened to all those Libyans. They were just wiped away in a, you know, a few minutes. And the people that are dying. And what I don't understand is, so the deniers are the same people that want to keep the you know, people of color, the brown people, the poor people, Hispanics and blacks coming up from the South. And somehow the images left, I must have crossed out the wrong ones. But there are studies that show that the global south is impacted more. They're impacted more already down there. They're already above 1.5 degree Celsius, average. Globally, we've already hit it twice, July and August this year. But the South has been, the global South has been already experiencing it. And I think one of the studies by Marshall Burke that I quoted in one of my papers, he came up with the study that just not a model, but looking at what happens to countries from one year to the next when temperature rises. And he figured that global GDP would go down by 23% by 2100 if they don't do anything about climate change. But the vast, like places like Russia and Norway, their GDP will go up. So it's really going to be bad in the global south. The United States is it's going to go down overall, but not as badly as Mexico and India. And I think the last IPCC report said, in some places, you can't work if it's so hot. I think the wet bulb, if it's above 35 degrees Celsius, wet bulb temperature, you really can't work outside for any period of time without endangering your health. So.
Susan, you had a question.
Yeah, I do. So Jim, thank you for all of your information and your perspective and all the work that you're doing. This is perhaps a quick and perhaps absolutely tangential question. Does your group within the Vets for Peace ever look at the nuclear power plants that are in war situations and the effect of damage upon the environment? The kind of dirty bombs that they present. We won't go into the connection between nuclear power and nuclear weapons at this moment, but just that within war situations.
Well, okay, what we do. So I've written a couple of papers, but that was mostly based on what climate change could do with the petroleum industry. We mostly rely on other people's work. So we would, and I don't recall anybody researching that particular aspect. It would have to be somebody else that has done that study. So if you know people that have done that, like I know this Leonard DeClercq he was doing studies trying to figure out, because the Ukrainians want to, we were kind of joking around, because the Ukrainians want to document all of this, and there has been some discussions of prosecuting the Vladimir Putin for all these emissions. And then I said, well, based on it's now another organization, but BP for over 60 years, I think it was when they were part of their, they had this mandate because when they were part of the government to do statistical analysis of energy. And they have come up with outlooks. And I should have showed the diagrams here, but of energy outlooks for the future going out, let's say 10, 20, 30 years. And their outlook from last year before the war started, projected there would be much more emissions, or less, there'll be much more emissions under the present GDP or the global GDP than there are now because of the global downturn from the war. So we joked that Vladimir Putin would then ask for a Nobel Prize for invading Ukraine because he's lowering the global emissions. Again, that was a very sarcastic joke, but again, we rely on other people's studies, but no, I have not looked at that particular
Mm.
aspect, but it would be terrible if, well, one thing we are, I mean, we've been using depleted uranium, and there was a thing about depleted.
Yeah.
Well, I was in the tank corps, and we used depleted uranium. That's what a high velocity called a sabot round. And the thing that you shoot into the tank is depleted uranium. And like I said, that's been used. We had those rounds way back when I was in the Army. That's what's nasty stuff, because it breaks into such small particles, and you inhale it, and you have like a little mini reactor in your individual cells, because it can travel into cells.
Jim, I have a question, if I might. You clearly are very concerned about the climate crisis, and I think, I think the one thing that we all recognize is that it's not something that's going to happen, but it's something that is happening now, and which I think is one of the things that you try to get across to people about the climate crisis, is that it's not something that will happen when you reach a certain amount of a certain number that they come up with, but it is something that is happening. And as you point out in Libya, and as we've seen from the droughts and the fires, both here in the United States and elsewhere. But then we talk about militarism, and we talk about the U.S. military's contribution to climate crisis and to the climate crisis. And climate activists have some very specific goals they want to achieve, and they have strategies, and they have different bills they're working on. What do we say to climate activists who do want to address this issue of militarism and its impact on the climate crisis, its contribution to the climate? What do we tell them to do? And I know you talked about protest and education, but is there something concretely we could tell them to work on?
Driving down the Pentagon budget. There was an article in Time magazine, I think it was about over a year ago, where they went in and they interviewed, there was a local factory shop, whatever, that took in a couple of Abrams battle tanks. It's a small tank that they used in Iraq to green it up. And they didn't release how much money they spent, but all they could do was raise the mileage from like 0.7 miles per gallon to 0.8 miles per gallon. So, I mean, whoopee. It's like you raised it 1/10 of a, mile per gallon. So the conclusion of the article was the only way to reduce the emissions is to reduce the Pentagon. That's our saying too. Plus, not only, I mean, General Milley said, well, we have to raise our budget because the Chinese are raising their budget. Well, why are the Chinese raising their budget? Because we're raising our budget. Plus, we spend almost 3 times more than they do. Plus, all the countries are a little bit worried. We were almost taken over by Donald, who said at one time, well, we got nuclear weapons. Why don't we use them? So it is not just the emissions from the military. Military, as I said, Azimuthov Ghosh pointed out, it's sort of the underlying reason. Imperialism, nationalism, militarism is the underlying cause of why we haven't been able to deal with climate change.
Let me just push this a little bit, and again, I'm not trying to put you on the spot here, but if we are, you mentioned you answered my question about what we can tell climate activists who recognize the contribution to the climate crisis that military makes. You answered it by saying cutting the military budget, but you know, there's a lot of different, there's a lot of money that's used for a lot of different things. Is there, including salaries and both to military, to personnel as well as to non-military personnel. Is there something more specific we can point to within the budget that we might say, you know, focus on X or Y, or that we might be able to build a campaign around?
Well, if you go to the National Priorities Project, then maybe what I'll do is I'll go ahead and send you a list of references you can pass around. And I'm sorry I was a little bit more prepared for this particular talk, but the National Priorities Project has a list of things, and Code Pink was actually passing this out, of all the things you could do with $100 billion that would, you know, increase. And I already mentioned helping developing countries, which would also help, you know, the climate situation. So this money, we're just wasting it on stuff we really, and then we spend more money on rehabbing our nuclear arms than, and like really, how many times do we need to kill ourselves with nuclear weapons? Like I said, I'm more worried about climate change. We can possibly negotiate even with Vladimir Putin and Xi, but we can't negotiate with Mother Nature. Once she gets ticked off, you know, and as you probably know, we could reach a tipping point, which we might be there already, when the methane in the permafrost starts releasing. There's more there than we've admitted, you know, as a civilization. There's also methane hydrates in the continental shelves that once the water temperature gets warm enough, those are going to start to release. So, and then by then we're just toast, or our children and grandchildren are toast. And,
Thank you. Okay, folks, it's 8:30. I'm going to just ask if there's, I see Jeffrey's hand. Are there any other folks who have a question? And before I recognize Jeffrey, because he asked one already. Any new folks? Okay, Jeffrey, why don't you go ahead and ask your question? This will be the final question of the evening.
So I guess Russia was right when they call us imperialists, to a degree. First off, sorry, I've been coughing, and that's why I sound a little hoarse. And secondly, depleted. Even though they say depleted uranium, it's still deadly, right?
Right. Thank you.
And personal question to all of you: Who else hates getting hot flashes and or break it out in cold sweats? Which are the?
I think we all do. We all do. I hope you get over COVID quickly, Jeffrey, and you have our hope that passes as quickly as possible for you. Okay, folks, I want to really extend a very big thank you to Jim, who's coming, as you know, from the march on the 17th to being arrested on the 18th, and to coming back to Detroit in time to do this presentation. And we will continue the discussion internally, I'm sure, at Watertown Citizens about the relationship of militarism to the climate crisis. So, Jim, thank you very much. We really appreciate your work and your continual work. Thank you for being one of the co-founders of this Climate Crisis and Militarism project. It is a great project to have at Veterans for Peace. And I just want to, other folks, we have a lot on our work at Watertown Citizens. It's a lot of activities that we are doing. Our website has just been updated by most of the working groups, so please visit it at watertowncitizens.org. And with that, I'm going to turn off the recording. And again, Jim, thank you very much. Good night,
Thank you
all.
for the opportunity.
Right, thank you.